Everyone possesses the innate ability to experience high achievement, yet few really understand the true nature of this ability, how to activate it, or even that they can truly tap an unlimited power source to become what they want to be and do what they want to do. In what may be his most dynamic work so far, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale leads us through the specific steps necessary to recognize and unleash the plus factor. Power of the Plus Factor shows us how to use this something extra in order to accomplish the impossible and achieve our true desires. And now, Dr. Peale.
Welcome to this recording from my new book, Power of the Plus Factor. What if I were to tell you that there is a power within you that can revolutionize your life? A power that is invisible, intangible, but completely real. A power that can transform you so dramatically that you can become an entirely new person, stronger, more confident, better balanced, more energetic, more resilient, more capable of coping with the ever-increasing complexity of modern living. Suppose I added that this remarkable force could lift you from failure to success, from illness to health, from self-doubt to self-assurance. And then, if I assured you further that it could help you find congenial friends, solve problems, break out of stale habits, nearly explode you into a totally different world, a world of enthusiasm, understanding, and joy, what would your reaction be? I think you'd want to find out about this power, what it is called, where does it come from, how do I find it, what must I do to get it into my life? The answers might surprise you. They are so simple. Everyone knows that there is a life force that sustains and animates every living thing on this planet. With it, you are alive. Without it, you are dead. This life force was put into all of us by the Creator, God Himself. What I'm talking about is a special manifestation of it, a special concentration. It can do remarkable things for those who understand it and who reach for it and allow it in their lives. I call it the plus factor. It is the quality of extraness that we see in certain people. People who live with more eagerness, more energy, more enthusiasm than others, who set higher goals and achieve them more often, who keep going always despite adversity and hardship, who shrug off misfortune and give out warmth and caring and encouragement wherever they go. People, in short, who have in themselves a marvelous plus factor at work. Well, you may say, I know such people, but what about me? How do I get hold of this extraness? Where can I find this plus factor? Well, if you want the plus factor to operate in your life, if you want to be on the receiving end of this extraordinary flow of power, you need to learn to think in a certain way, act in a certain way, and be a certain kind of person. This learning process is attainable by everyone. This book we are recording is designed to help you achieve it. But don't expect achievement to come easily. The plus factor is implanted in all of us, but it is planted deep. The Creator knew that a degree of struggle is good for us. He knows that what we work for, we value most. Consequently, He arranged things so that the plus factor does not emerge spontaneously. It has to be activated. This hidden dynamo was put into us, but it's our job to remove the blocks that short-circuit the flow of power. It's up to each one to open the doors of our inner selves and let this force, this plus factor, come through. You can often tell at a glance whether the plus factor is working in people or not. You see a young woman walking down a city street. Her hair is blowing in the wind. An almost tangible aura of health and vitality surrounds her. Confidence is in her clear eyes. A sense of purpose is in her stride. You say to yourself, there it is, she has it. She has the plus factor, and the plus factor has her. Then you come upon some unfortunate derelict slumped against a wall. His head is sunk on the chest, the eyes staring vacantly out into space. You know very well that the plus factor is not operative in this person. It has been blocked by some or all of a whole series of minus factors, things like alcohol, drugs, fear, anxiety, guilt, disease, to the point where the individual is no longer able to cope with even the most elementary challenges of existence. For the release of the plus factor, the more we learn to believe and trust and open ourselves to it, the more we will find our goals achieved, our ambitions realized. Fear and tension subside, and spiritual growth becomes not just possible, but almost inevitable. We will show how the plus factor has helped people in times of difficulty or distress, and will offer suggestions that will help you find your plus factor and use it. The purpose of this recording is to develop a better understanding of this wonderful inner potential and how to use it creatively. Here's how it works. A few years ago in Texas, an unemployed salesman named Jim Head, unable to find a selling job, had been trying to earn a few dollars by making cheesecakes. His mother had been a notable cook, and this made the cakes appealing to friends. However, the income from this did not meet his needs. Then, one night, he had an astonishingly real dream in which he saw himself baking a cake using all sorts of unusual ingredients. So clear was the dream and so detailed the recipe that he even remembered when he woke up how much baking soda he had used. Amazed by the vividness of this dream sequence, he went into the kitchen and concocted a cake exactly to the dream's specifications. When a neighbor came in later, Jim offered him a piece. "Yahoo!" cried the visitor. "It's terrific!" Thus was born what they call the Yahoo cake. Baked in the shape of the Lone Star State, it has sold tremendously. Jim Head had little experience as a baker. He knew nothing about food distribution. But the plus factor that came surging in on the heels of that compelling dream gave him the energy and the optimism and the positive thinking to overcome all such handicaps and limitations. Today, he is a happy and successful man. In Chicago, years ago, there was a ragged newsboy who used to huddle on a sidewalk grating near the Chicago Tribune building because the flow of heat from the presses operating in the basement kept him warm. From that vantage point, the boy could see well-dressed men and women going into a theater across the street, where brilliant lights on the marquees spelled out the evening's attraction. One cold night, he decided that someday he would be that attraction himself. And to record the birth of this impossible dream, he took a rusty nail and scratched his name and date on the concrete of a windowsill behind the grating. And the years passed, but the dream did not die, and the day came when the ragged newsboy, now attired in white tie and tails, held the crowds that came to the theater spellbound with the most astounding array of magical tricks the stage had ever seen. His name was Howard Thurston. He was the great magician, and sometimes he would take his friends and show them the name and the date dimly scratched on the concrete windowsill so many years before. A dream just as impossible as that once came to a little black child living in an orphanage in Troy, New York. Her name was Dorothy Brown. When Dorothy was 5 years old, she was taken to a hospital for a tonsillectomy. Most youngsters would have been frightened or at least apprehensive, but Dorothy wasn't. Instead, she was fascinated by the wondrous world of medicine in which she found herself. People helping other people by relieving pain, setting broken bones, curing diseases. Then and there, something in Dorothy Brown decided that someday she would be part of that hospital world. She was only 5 years old, but she set a goal for herself. Eventually, she would become a doctor. Born out of wedlock, she had been placed in the orphanage because her mother could not afford to keep her. It was understood when she reached the age when other children enter high school, she would have to go to work. She had no friends outside the orphanage, no family, no connections of any kind, and yet, something flickered inside this child, a tiny spark that became a flame that ignored all the odds, all the laws of probability, a flame breathed on by the plus factor, and consequently, a flame that didn't go out. One day, this little girl, Dorothy Brown, asked the superintendent of the orphanage why she never had any visitors, as some of the other children did. That kind man mentioned this to some of his friends at the church he attended. The result was that a white family came to see the child. When Dorothy told them she intended to be a doctor, they listened, and they didn't laugh. They felt her chances were non-existent, but still they gave her attention and love and encouragement. As was the orphanage custom in those days, at the age of 14, Dorothy went to work as a maid, earning $14 a week, $2 a day. There were many books in her employer's home, and she was allowed to read them. In 2 years, she saved $500 and decided to register for high school. When the registrar asked for her home address, she had to admit that she had no job, no home, no address. But when a person has the aura of the plus factor around her, other people step forward to help, impelled by impulses which they may or may not understand. The principal of the high school listened to Dorothy's story. Then he found a couple who agreed to take her in as a boarder. She paid for her room as long as her money held out. When it ran out, the black couple kept her anyway. When she graduated from high school, she went back to being a maid in order to earn money for college. At the wages then being paid, she figured it would take her 11 years. But her faith in her goal never faltered. She asked God to help her turn it into a reality. She worked extra hours. She took on extra jobs. Something gave her the endurance and energy she needed. It was the plus factor, the wonderful plus factor at work in her. One of her employers, hearing her talk of becoming a doctor, told her of a scholarship being offered by a small college in North Carolina. She applied for that scholarship and won it. She took all the science and pre-med courses that were offered, and when finally she graduated, there was no money for medical school. When you are really in the flow of the plus factor, when its invisible current is supporting and sustaining you, it sometimes seems that even the mighty sweep of world events reaches out to help. The onset of World War II caused a shortage of manpower, and the Army turned to women with a background in science to work as inspectors in ordnance depots. In 2 years, Dorothy Brown saved $2,000. It still wasn't enough, but she could wait no longer. She entered Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. When her funds ran out, her Methodist college friends came to her aid. And the day finally came when the friendless little waif from the orphanage in Troy, New York, was a doctor at last. What does Dr. Brown herself think about all this? She believes that just as God gives each one of us our special talent, so he also gives us dreams to make us aware of that talent. It doesn't matter, she says, how far-fetched or unattainable the dream may seem. If we remain steadfast, if we have enough faith to go to work and stay at work, trying to make the dream come true, we will succeed at last. 4 centuries ago, a great French essayist wrote these words: "No wind favors him who has no destined port." He meant that a person without clear-cut goals is doomed to sail in circles, always frustrated, always rudderless, never getting anywhere. His words were true then, and they're true even more today, because the world has become a far more complex and competitive place. In this fast-moving, super-specialized life, unless you are able clearly and calmly and deliberately to set goals for yourself, you're lost, becalmed in a sea of indecision and inertia. When people set goals for themselves that are clear and distinct, when they hold tenaciously to those goals through times of disappointment, frustration, or even apparent failure, when they image themselves progressing steadily toward those goals and finally achieving them, then a force emerges from deep within, so powerful that it is virtually irresistible. That force is the plus factor. Once the plus factor makes its appearance and really takes hold, the surge of energy and confidence becomes so strong that it overcomes all obstacles. Take, for example, the story of Walter Harder. It's a thrilling story. Walter Harder just graduated from high school in a small town in Pennsylvania, seemed like quite an ordinary young man. He had a slight limp caused by a badly broken leg in childhood. Otherwise, he seemed like an average young fella, unable to go to college because his family couldn't financially afford it. As any farmer can tell you today, things can get very tough in a farming community. Certainly, there were few openings for any kind of work in Walter Harder's area. Walter had a goal. It was to find work in New York City, where he didn't know a soul. Only one thing could have given him the unshakable conviction that he could achieve such a goal: the plus factor. Walter Harder went down to the local telephone office in the small town where he lived and borrowed the New York City telephone directory. He looked up the listings of various stores in the metropolitan area. Finally, he decided to concentrate on a well-known chain of stores. There were addresses for 393 of them scattered over Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island, and the Bronx. Walter Harder told himself that among all those stores there just had to be an opening for him. He made up his mind to write a letter to every single one of them. This was a big undertaking for a teenager with no resources, no help of any kind. He composed a letter expressing his desire to become associated with any store in the chain in any capacity from floor sweeper on up. He had no typewriter, so he wrote by hand to 393 managers of the various stores. He set himself a quota of 15 letters a day, and he stuck to it day after day. But no replies came back, not a single one. Of all the various forms of rejection, silence can be the most devastating. But something was pushing and sustaining Walter Harder. He kept doggedly on, writing letters. Finally, Walter Harder asked his parents to let him leave home and try his luck personally in the big city. They were apprehensive because he knew no one there, but finally they agreed to let him go and scraped up enough money to sustain him for a few days. They figured he'd be soon back. In Manhattan, Walter walked down to Times Square and there found one of the chain's large stores. He asked for the manager, who explained that even if the store had received a letter from Walter, it would have been sent to the personnel department of the chain over on Park Avenue. Walter wasn't even sure what a personnel department was, but he followed directions to a huge building on Park Avenue. There, when he identified himself, he was taken to a stern-faced man sitting behind an enormous desk who seemed to be in charge of everything. The man stared at Walter for what seemed like a long time. Finally, he stood up, smiled, and pointed to a table holding stacks of letters. "Your applications are all there," he said, "all 393 of them. We knew that someday you would walk in here. We have a clerk's job waiting for you. You can start this afternoon." An amazing story? Yes, but a true one. Walter Harder eventually became a store manager, and even after he moved on to other things, he carried with him the momentum that the plus factor in the form of initiative and perseverance had given him. Well, here are 5 suggestions that I think will help you. I know they will, for at different times they have helped me. Number 1, sharpen your thinking about goal setting. Sit down and give it some real thought. Obviously, goals range all the way from very broad life goals to small, specific ones. Learn to distinguish between long-term and short-term goals. Decide how many you can handle. Be realistic about the amount of time and effort that may be necessary. The objective is always worth the price. One must not drift in vague circles, but use the compass of your brain. Chart a course for yourself and follow it. Number 2, make a commitment to excellence. Sometimes young people say, "Well, I really don't know yet what I want to do with my life." Okay, perhaps you don't. But while you're waiting for that goal to come into view or into focus, there is nothing to stop you from choosing one important goal right now. The determination to do everything as well as you can do it, to make the most of whatever you have in the way of talent or ability. I remember a few years ago I met a lady who had been in high school with me. She listened to me make a speech out on the West Coast. She looked at me pensively for quite a while. Finally, she said, "Well, Norman, I guess you've done pretty well with what little you had to begin with." People always laugh when I tell this story, but in a way, she was paying me a great compliment. At least I like to think so. I hope I did take that little and tried to make the most of it. That is what we are all supposed to do. Number 3, learn to distinguish between a goal and a wish, for there is a great difference. There's an old saying, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. That's just a way of saying that simply wishing for something isn't going to make it happen. The fairy tales we all loved are full of spells that bring instant happiness and charms that make dreams come true. But they are fantasy, not reality. The reason such stories have had such appeal is that they promise glowing rewards without effort. But life isn't like that. As a boy, I had a wish to be a pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds. It was a great idea, but it was just a wish, and so not a realizable goal. Compare daydreaming and wishing with a young couple I knew who had a goal to own a home of their own. They couldn't afford to buy a house, but they did manage a down payment on a lot. Once they had the lot, they drew some rough plans on wrapping paper on the kitchen table of their little rented apartment. Then they went out with stakes and string and paced off an outline of their dream house on the lot. They discussed what every room would contain, what it would look like. Whenever they thought of a larger house, they would change the stakes and the strings. This went on month after month. To have their someday house, when either of them took a moonlighting job, the money went into their building fund. They denied themselves a lot of minor pleasures to keep the fund growing. At the end of 3 years, they took their plans and their savings to a mortgage company. By this time, there was a kind of momentum, a quiet confidence, and aura of determination about them that impressed even the hard-boiled loan officer. Call it the plus factor. They got their mortgage. They built their dream house. They're living happily in it today with 2 attractive children. Why? Because they didn't sit and vaguely wish. They had a plan, they had a timetable, they had a goal, and they went for it, and they got it. Number 4, prepare for ultimate goals by achieving interim goals. If you learn to do this consistently, you won't even have to over-try for your ultimate goals. They will come to you in due course. Often I've seen this happen in industry. Once I asked a bank president how he got his start in banking. By cleaning things, he said with a smile. My first job was sweeping up in a little small-town country bank. It wasn't much of a job, but I cleaned everything as if my whole future in banking depended on it, which, of course, at that point, it did. Finally, I became an errand boy, then a teller, then a cashier, and so on. At every stage, I tried to do everything well, with excellence. By the time they needed a president to clean up some really big financial messes, I knew every step of the banking business, and so they called on me. That man rose from a menial position to a top post, and I have no doubt that the plus factor was aiding him all the way up. Number 5, choose goals that will benefit others as well as yourself. A goal that involves concern for other people seems to liberate the plus factor much more readily than one that doesn't. It's not enough for a person entering medical school to want to be rich and successful. His or her basic goal should be the desire to help people. The same is true of lawyers, businessmen, or whomever, just about everyone. You'll find it helps to have the concept of service embedded in your goal. I know a young man named Isaac Tigert who summoned up all his courage and opened a restaurant in London, England. He called it the Hard Rock Cafe. It was a very loud, very brassy, very exuberant, and very with it American, and many people thought it would be a resounding flop. On the contrary, it was and is a huge success. Long lines of people are always queued up, as they say in Britain, waiting to get in. Now there is a Hard Rock Cafe on West 57th Street in Manhattan, and another in Stockholm, and another in Tokyo, and another in Dallas. And what is Isaac Tigert's motto? Love all, serve all. God is my partner. He, Isaac, is just that kind of person. I once asked John Johnson, publisher of Ebony magazine, the secret of his great success. By small, realizable goals, he replied. In time, those small goals added up to the achievement of big goals. This is the attitude that underlies some of America's greatest success stories. A number of years ago, a young man was flailing around at various jobs. His problem, none of them really seemed to serve anyone. Since childhood, he had been imbued with the concept of service, of the improvability of the individual, of the value of time, the importance of attitude. Even as a 17-year-old, he had begun the habit of writing on slips of paper the gist of his daily reading in magazines and books. In 1921, pushed out of his job at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh because of a recession, he decided to push ahead with his idea that had been born of that early reading, to publish a reader's service consisting of articles of value condensed to save time and issued in a small pocket-sized magazine that the reader could carry around. The young man approached existing magazine publishers of the time, but they all turned down his idea. Even the great William Randolph Hearst told him it would never sell enough to succeed. But as the young man said some years later, I didn't care if I made a penny, as long as the magazine served the reader. Already the plus factor that comes to the aid of people with altruistic goals was coming into the picture. With faith in his idea, DeWitt Wallace and his wife Lila started putting out their little magazine. That was in 1922. When the Wallaces died, the little magazine had 100 million readers, 30 million subscribers, 18 million in the United States, and the rest worldwide. The Reader's Digest was and is the great publishing success story of our time. Is there another step in this process of liberating and activating the plus factor? Yes, there is. It consists of just 2 magic words. And what are these magic words? They are, do it. Have you got an idea? Do it. Do you have a dream? Do it. Do you have an ambition? Do it. Have you got some great motivation, some intense desire? Well then, do it. Are you defeated by something? Are you afraid of something? Are you hesitant to try something? Many people spend their lives being afraid to do what they really want to do. But if they stand tall and say, with God's help, I will do this thing, then the plus factor is liberated and power begins to surge into their lives. That power begins to flow at the moment when they take the first step, or even when the first positive thought comes. No matter how intense you're dreaming, no matter how clearly defined your goals, nothing is going to happen until you make it happen by taking an active step toward the fulfillment of those dreams, a decisive step toward the realization of those goals. Usually it is the fear of failure that blocks the flow of power from the plus factor. That fear leads to inertia, sometimes to a real paralysis of personality. And the longer the inertia persists, the harder it is to break through it. Do you want power? Do you want peace of mind? Do you want to reach for success across the quicksand of timidity and doubt? Then take those two magic words. Say them to yourself again and again. Ask God to help you, and then do it. And not tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year. Now. Do it now. No matter how long it takes, persist. No matter how discouraged you may become, persevere. No matter how much you want to quit, hang in there. President Calvin Coolidge once said, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, 'Press On,' has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race." Winston Churchill said the same thing in fewer words. Where any worthwhile endeavor was concerned, he said, "Never give up. Never, 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 never give up." Why is persistence, why is perseverance of such enormous importance? Because so little of consequence is achieved without it. Because lack of it leads so often to failure. We've all heard the story of the rusty old pickaxe stuck in the rocky wall of an unproductive mine, left there by a miner who had given up and walked away from it. Years later, another miner idly swung his pick against the same wall and broke through into the fabulous Comstock lode. Untold wealth had been waiting for the first miner if only he had persisted just a little longer. A few more swings of the pickaxe would have done it, but he gave up too soon and never knew what that negative decision had cost him. Contrast that with the job-hunting young man in Boston who saw a want ad in the local paper. He wrote to the post office box number that was given but received no reply. He wrote again and yet a third time, still no answer, so he went down to the post office, located the box, and waited there until someone came to collect the mail. He followed that person to an office, went inside and told the office manager what he had done, adding that he still wanted very much to have the job that had been advertised. The manager looked at him in complete astonishment. "Well," he said, "we are always looking for people with perseverance and determination. You seem to have both, so we'll take you on." That was how Roger Babson, who later became a famous financier, got his first job. Here's how my dictionary defines the two important words persist and perseverance. Persist, to continue steadily and firmly in some state, purpose, or course of action, especially in spite of opposition, remonstrance, etc. Persevere, to persist in any undertaking, maintain a purpose in spite of difficulty or obstacles, to continue steadfastly. Do not minimize the power of persistence. Just hang in there always, always, and never, never give up. Realization and achievement come to those who persist. One human characteristic that is always admired is the ability to face danger or suffering bravely. And closely related to this ability is the capacity to make right decisions when facing difficult moral choices. It's strange how often people who react wisely and strongly in an emergency feel that the wisdom and the strength came not from them, not from an act of will or determination on their part, but from mysterious sources that they cannot identify. Such was the case with John Skurjanik, a power line foreman for the Southern Colorado Power Company. Skurjanik had been checking power lines in the mountains and was headed back to the company offices driving a half-ton pickup truck over the winding mountain roads. Early in the afternoon, he came to US 50, a two-lane macadam road where it begins a steep descent. That was a dangerous piece of road. 5 people had been killed there in the previous 3 years. As Skurjanik stopped at the intersection, a car flashed past him, going downhill so fast that he knew something was wrong. 2 women were in the car. One was clutching the wheel, the other was waving her arms and obviously screaming. It was apparent that the brakes on the car had failed and the gears had been stripped also. It was hurtling down the mountain completely out of control. Ahead of it lay at least 5 miles of steep grades and hairpin mountain curves. Skurjanik swung his truck into the road behind the runaway car and stepped on the gas. And it was a strange thing, he said later. I was already planning exactly what I was going to do. The idea just seemed to come to me from nowhere. I don't know how I thought of it, because I had never heard of it being done before, but it seemed the only possible way I could keep those women from flying off the road. The runaway car was going 75 miles per hour. It took a mile for Skurjanik to catch up with it. He knew that just ahead was a relatively straight stretch of road, perhaps a mile long. If he was to pass the car, it had to be then. He floored his accelerator, the truck shot forward, the needle on its speedometer registered 85 miles per hour. Now they were roaring down the road side by side. The danger to both vehicles was enormous. If they so much as touched fenders, all the occupants would be dead. But Skurjanik's mind was locked around an idea that came from nowhere. He pulled in front of the runaway car, watching it in his rear-view mirror. When it was directly behind him, he began to slow down, hoping that the woman driver would not panic. He waited until her front bumper touched his rear bumper. The cars bounced apart, but he knew the woman understood what he was attempting to do and was trying to help him. The bumpers touched again, solid contact this time. Gingerly, gradually, Skurjanik began to apply his brakes. As the speed lessened, he threw his truck into second gear. Ahead loomed a sharp curve, but the combined drag of brakes and the engine was enough. Just before they reached the curve, both cars shuddered to a stop. Where did the know what to do come from? and the determination and the driving skill and the courage, no doubt about it. This courage came from the God-given gift that I call the plus factor. Take another illustration. One December evening, a young football coach stared through a Birmingham, Alabama hotel window at the dark night. He had been head coach at Georgia Tech for only 7 years. In that short time, he had reversed a long losing trend in Tech football. His Yellow Jackets had battled hard all season long, finally winning the chance to play favored Michigan State in the postseason All-American Bowl on New Year's Eve. Tech was the underdog, but Coach Bill Curry had a lot of confidence in his young players, at least until now. Word had come to him that 4 of the key players on his team had broken training. All players had been told that physical conditioning was of the utmost importance. They were expected to abide by training rules at all times. Failure to do so, they were warned, would bring swift disciplinary action. They were asked if they understood this. All said that they did. Nevertheless, with the all-important game just 48 hours away, 4 of the players had failed to observe the curfew deadline. After a team dinner, they were supposed to be in bed at a certain time. But a bed check by assistant coaches had revealed that the first-string quarterback, a flanker back, a split end, and the reserve fullback were not where they were supposed to be, in bed. What should the penalty be? If the coach disqualified them from playing in this crucial game, Tech would almost certainly lose. Nowhere is winning football games more important than in the Deep South. If Curry suspended his players and lost, the storm of criticism would be furious. If he announced his intention of suspending them, the pressure to rescind the order would be enormous. All the acceptance and popularity that Curry had built up during the years would now be on the line. The most important game Tech had played in years would be in jeopardy, and yet the players had known the rules. They had broken them. How would they ever learn the importance of self-discipline, self-control, if they were given a tap on the wrist and allowed to play? How would the players feel who had obeyed the rules? What was the right thing to do? When he asked himself that question, Coach Curry knew the answer. He issued the orders. The offending players would not be allowed to play in the game. Was the plus factor operating here? Of course it was. It is always operating when a person making a difficult decision chooses the one that is morally right. And when the plus factor is thus injected into a situation, remarkable things can happen. Take that football game. The backup quarterback, Todd Rampley, was only a sophomore. The pressure on him was terrific. He might have made all sorts of mistakes. Instead, he played the game of his life. Linebacker Ted Roof, Tech's defensive captain, said, "It's time to play harder." Incredibly, in the closing minutes, Tech scored a touchdown that gave them a sensational 17-14 victory. If you had been in the stadium in Birmingham that night, you would not have been able to see the plus factor because it is always invisible. But you could have felt it as an underdog football team, crippled by the loss of its key players, rose up with a surge of courage and determination and won the game. Remember also that enthusiasm is super important. It's a basic element in successful living. The alive type of personality always goes places when that aliveness is accompanied by positive thinking and solid faith. Enthusiasm releases and feeds the plus factor that is within you. It may not be very strong or effective at the moment, but it can become so. And one way to activate it into powerful force is to have enthusiasm going for you, real contagious enthusiasm. But you may say, what if you don't have enthusiasm? You can't be enthusiastic if you lack enthusiasm, and you cannot buy it in a drugstore in the form of a pill or a liquid, so you're out of luck. For if you just do not have enthusiasm, you cannot be an enthusiastic person. The answer to that common excuse is, oh, yes, you can. All you have to do is to practice the as-if principle. This is one of the most powerful methodologies that may be employed by the person who really wants to do something with himself or herself. Well, what is the as-if principle? Professor William James, sometimes called the father of American psychological science, said that if you want to cultivate a desired attitude, you may do so by acting as if you had it. If, for example, you are filled with fear, and instead you want to be a person of courage, proceed to act courageously. In due course, you will ultimately become a courageous person. This principle has been proved to be effective by many people, myself included. I personally believe in the as-if principle because I have used it and found that it works. In my younger years, I was the victim of an enormous inferiority complex, and as is common among people so afflicted, I practiced the as-if principle, but in reverse, for I acted as if I were a nobody with no ability. And so naturally I developed into a sadly defeated person. I became exactly as I acted. Then, through various felicitous circumstances, I committed my life to Christ and became a positive thinker and began to practice the as-if principle. When a person develops enthusiasm, exciting things begin happening. From then on, that individual is very likely to become different. If previously he or she was lacking in drive and forcefulness, the change can be dramatic indeed. A hitherto unimaginative, sleepy man or woman suddenly comes alive and moves up and on to a success previously undreamed of by anyone, including oneself. Actually, enthusiasm is one of the most effective activating agents. It gets people going, really going, and in ways that are often spectacular. I have made a list of a few ways that enthusiasm may be developed and increased. 1. As stated earlier, employ the as-if principle. Act as if you had enthusiasm, and it will tend to develop in your mind. I repeat this for the simple reason that it is most effective. Number 2, practice being enthusiastic about simple things. For example, look at those fleecy clouds against a blue sky. Isn't that beautiful? Or, honey, I never tasted a more delicious dinner. You surely are a terrific cook. You might also admire the nicely cut green lawn or the purring sound of your car motor as it swings out into the roadway. Enthusiasm for the simple things will add up, finally, to a general attitude of enthusiasm. Number 3, tell yourself every morning that you love your job. Think of it as interesting, even fascinating. By so doing, you will ultimately get enthusiastic about your work, and you will thereby do a much better job. Number 4, daily as you board a bus, or a train, or the subway, tell yourself that you really like people. Do this even when they push and shove you. Look for the interesting and likable qualities in people. Act toward them as if you were enthusiastic about them. In due course, you will actually become enthusiastic about people. Number 5, every morning say aloud a statement such as this: "This is the day which the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Say that every morning of your life. Another good one is, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." You'll get to loving God, and when you get to love God, you will love life. You will become an enthusiast. That's the way it works. There's another method for developing enthusiasm and thereby releasing your plus factor, a method superior in my judgment to any other that may be used. This particular method is bypassed by some people for what is really an irrational reason. They are mentally and emotionally set against it because some person they don't like used it, or they had an unhappy experience with someone who taught it, or perhaps they encountered unattractive forms of it, or they just don't understand it. What I'm referring to is what I call the Christian experience method. This, in brief, is the establishment of a definite personal relationship with Jesus Christ as your Lord, your Savior, and your friend. A relationship so close and real that He is with you every day, helping you in everything. It creates a new lifestyle, as if you had been born all over again, this time as a new person. A biblical description of what happens to a person is this: "If any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." People who have this tremendous experience are the outstanding enthusiasts of this world. For them, every day, life is more and more wonderful. Things that once threw them, defeated them, can now be overcome. They rise above problems, or throw them out of the way, or know how to live with them successfully. The Christian experience is method number 1 for becoming a genuinely enthusiastic person and for releasing the power of the plus factor. Just how do I know this can happen to you? Because it happened to me, and I've seen it happen with amazing results in many persons. Because I believe this tremendous experience should not be denied to others who are stumbling along, being defeated at the same old roadblocks when they do not need to live on a defeat level. This is the basic reason I'm recording this message. One night I was speaking at a motivational rally in Western Canada. Several thousand people were present, most of them in sales. I judged that the average age of the large audience was perhaps no more than 30. All seemed imbued with the desire to get ahead in their respective businesses. That everyone present had a definite desire for self-improvement was indicated by their serious but enthusiastic attitude. I spoke that night on the subject, "Enthusiasm Makes the Difference," and pointed out that an enthusiastic attitude is an important ingredient in success. After the speech, I returned to my hotel, and walking to the elevator, I was accosted by a nice-looking young man who told me he had followed me from the hall because he wanted to discuss something of a personal nature. His problem, he said, was desultoriness. He just couldn't care less about anything, including his work. He knew his attitude was very wrong, but he'd not been able to do anything about it. As a matter of fact, he said he hadn't cared enough to make an effort to correct himself. But he told me that my message that night on enthusiasm had really reached him and disturbed him. For the first time, he realized that he had no future unless he changed from his desultory attitude and became an excited, enthusiastic person. This change would require a miracle, he asserted, and he doubted very much that a miracle would happen. But he concluded, for the first time in my life, I really want to change. I told him that the desire to change was the first step in changing. Intensity of desire is the beginning of the process of becoming different, I declared, and offered the opinion that he was ready now for something great to happen to him. I know I've got to become outgoing, enthusiastic, even excited if I'm to go further toward real success, but how in the world can this happen to an apathetic, uninterested guy like me? That's a $64 question, he concluded dejectedly. What's your name, my friend? They just call me Freddie, he replied. This conversation lasted perhaps 10 minutes, and during it we stood in a rather busy hotel lobby. Well, Freddie, I will level with you. It's not easy to effect change in a personality where disinterest has so long been prevalent. Something dramatically acute is necessary to cause definitive change. You may have to spend a long time unlearning defeatist mental habits. But I said, there is one way in which a healing therapy can take place, sometimes almost instantly. It requires that intensity of desire I spoke of, plus an admission that you can do nothing for yourself. And finally, I said, Freddie, I don't know how you'll take this, but I've got to give it to you straight. A complete commitment of yourself to Jesus Christ will change you and your future. If it is His will to release you immediately, He can do that. But He may put you through the long process of unlearning and relearning new mental habits. The only thing to do is just to ask Him. That's all. I understand, he said, and he thanked me. We shook hands and said good night. I have never seen that man again. But a year or so later, at a convention, a man said, I've a message for you. Freddie said to tell you what you suggested really worked. And also, he wants me to tell you he will always love you for pointing the way. I might add, he concluded, that Freddie is one of our top producers. He is a ball of fire with enthusiasm. Freddie's plus factor was released, and enthusiasm became a renewing force in his life and in his business experience. And the same can happen to anyone who will employ the unfailing method which I gave that night to Freddie. He was smart enough to accept it and go with the power of the plus factor. God bless you every day, all the way.